there, everybody, and welcome back to the Sagas of Swamp Thing podcast. Today we're reading Swamp Thing Volume 1, Issue 12, but just a little catch-up before we get into that. In the last issue, we saw Swamp Thing fight a man named Zachary Nail, who was actually coming into Swamp Thing from the Phantom Stranger comic that was running concurrent with this volume. And Zachary Nail had a plan to start a new Eden inside of this big domed glass structure that just happened to be in the middle of the swamp. So he told his worm helpers to kidnap people from the swamps so that they could build New Eden along with Zachary Nail. So the worms ended up capturing Matt Cable and Abby Arcane, which is of course how Swamp Thing stumbles onto this New Eden, is because he's trying to track down where Cable and Abby have been taken. And when Matt and Abby wake up inside of this New Eden, they meet a bunch of new characters. There is an old man named Luke and an African-American couple named Jefferson Bolt and Ruth. There's a guy named Sheriff Kane who's there as well. And the main thing to note here is that as New Eden is falling apart at the end after Swamp Thing comes to rescue them, Zachary Nail ends up killing Ruth, and before he can get his revenge on Zachary Nail, Swamp Thing pulled him away, so he is very angry at Swamp Thing right now. And issue 11 ends with Swamp Thing walking away alone, of course, and he's all sad, of course, and he happens upon this pink crystal stone that has a 7-sided star inside of it, and as he picks it up, it actually transports him back to prehistoric times, it seems, because he is confronted by a dinosaur. And that is where we left off on the last issue. So first things first, with issue 12, we got the cover. We see Swamp Thing is fighting said dinosaur from the last issue. Swamp Thing is trying with all his might to not be eaten by this dinosaur as it opens its mouth and tries to snap down on Swamp Thing. But Swamp Thing is holding it open with his foot and his hand, and he's also shoving a small tree into the mouth vertically to help hold it open. And this issue is written by Len Wein with art by Nestor Redondo, and it is called The Eternity Man. And as we turn to the first page, we see exactly what was on the cover pretty much. A T-Rex is charging Swamp Thing as he stands there trying to figure out what just happened. And we get a caption right away that says, "Hallucination. The Swamp Thing struggles desperately to convince himself that's all it really is, an illusion, a bad dream, a nightmare. But if that's true, why does the mossy man-brute smell the noxious stench of countless lichen decaying on the monster's flesh? Why does he feel the creature's fetid breath pressing hot against his sensitive eyelids? Hallucination? Perhaps. But this hallucination is a hungry one, and dinner seems almost within its reach." So Swamp Thing is still confused as this dinosaur charges him, and he looks down at the pink stone with the star in it, and it's now glowing. And the narration says, "Startled and confused, the Swamp Thing glances at the giant gemstone gleaming behind him, remembers the agonizing pain he suffered when he brushed the 7-pointed star carved into its face. Pain followed by a writhing rainbow, which faded to the mossy man monster here on this sprawling prehistoric plain. A tract that will soon become his funeral ground unless the Swamp Thing can somehow defend himself." So with that, Swamp Thing looks next to him, and he sees a small tree that seems to have died because it has no branches or anything, and he pulls it out of the ground. And then as the T-Rex comes to bite down on him, he shoves it in his mouth just like on the cover, and he thinks, "There, the Tyrannosaurus can't chomp me if it can't close those grisly jaws." But unfortunately for Swamp Thing, he overestimated how strong that tree was, and the T-Rex is able to break the tree in half as it chomps down, but it still misses Swamp Thing. And as the tree breaks, Swamp Thing thinks, "No, the big brute is stronger than I thought. Cracked the tree like a toothpick, but the pain is driving it mad. I've got to get out of its way before." But it's too late. Swamp Thing gets hit by the dinosaur's tail as it swings around as it thrashes in pain, and Swamp Thing is knocked to the ground by this. So now that Swamp Thing's on the ground and seemingly disoriented or knocked out, the dinosaur moves in for the final blow. The narration says, "He senses more than he sees the great scaled head looming above him, razored teeth reaching for his throat, and he knows there is no time to save himself, which is when a snarling miracle seems to drop from the heavens." So just as the dinosaur is about to bite down and kill Swamp Thing, a man appears out of nowhere and jumps on the dinosaur's back, and this guy looks like a feral white dude. He's got a loincloth and boots made of skin, and he has an interesting weapon I don't think I've ever seen before. It's a combination of a spear and axe, and both of the heads on this are made from stone. So obviously this is a local human, not a time traveler like Swamp Thing is. So as the man lands on the dinosaur's back, of course, the dinosaur stops what he's doing with Swamp Thing, and he tries to see what's on his back. And as Swamp Thing sees the man jump on this dinosaur, he thinks, "What? It's not possible. That's a man." Then the narration says, "But the fur-clad warrior seems more than a man, as he slashes wildly at his reptilian foe, seeking the creature's jugular." So the man is kind of riding on the dinosaur now, and he's using the axe side of his spear, and he's swinging it with all his might into the neck of this dinosaur. And Swamp Thing just stands up and watches this in disbelief as he thinks, "Incredible! If this truly is the dinosaur age, man won't exist for another 500,000 years. But anachronism or otherwise, that man risked his life to help me, so now it's my turn to help him." And with that, Swamp Thing rushes over to this T-Rex-like dinosaur's arm, and he begins to wrench it like he's trying to snap it backwards along its elbow. And the narration says, "Muscle straining to no avail, the moss-encrusted creature that was once Dr. Alec Holland labors to topple the mighty Saurian. And at last, there comes the sudden sound of snapping bone and cartilage." Now, I was a little confused by the art here because, like I said, it looks like Swamp Thing takes hold of the dinosaur's arm, but on the last panel of this page, we see Swamp Thing's actually on the back leg of the dinosaur, and that is the limb that he snaps. And as the bone breaks, the dinosaur, of course, jolts up in pain, and the human man flies off the dinosaur's back, and then we also see that his axe spear is still lodged in the dinosaur's neck. And it seemed at first that Swamp Thing was trying to accomplish what ended up happening, which was breaking the leg of this dinosaur. But maybe that was too violent for the 70s or something, because as the dinosaur's leg breaks, Swamp Thing thinks, "Dinosaur was too heavy, couldn't lift it, but my misplaced leverage seems to have broken its leg." And as we turn the page, we see the human land on the ground, and he's laying face up, but unfortunately for him, and against what Swamp Thing was trying to do in the first place, the dinosaur also falls, and the spear end of the spear axe that is lodged in the dinosaur's throat ends up stabbing into the man's abdomen and pinning him to the ground. And as Swamp Thing sees this, he thinks, "No, my friend didn't get out of the way in time. The Tyrannosaurus landed on him, impaling him with his own spear." And then Swamp Thing rushes over to the man, and he begins to try to pull him from out under the spear's pressure, but there's a whole Tyrannosaurus Rex pushing on that, and Swamp Thing isn't going to move a dang thing. And as he pulls to try to free the man, Swamp Thing thinks, "Maybe it's not too late. Got to get him out from under the dinosaur's carcass. Do what I can to keep him alive, till I can find the proper herbs and such to heal him." And as Swamp Thing attempts to pull the man out from under the spear, we can see in the background that the pink crystal stone is beginning to glow again. And once again, the art's a little unclear here, but I do believe Swamp Thing does end up wrenching the man free from underneath the spear. Because we see Swamp Thing feeling for the man's pulse, and the man is still alive, and he looks up at Swamp Thing, and there's something interesting in his eyes. The irises are pink, and it looks like they're in a certain shape. And as Swamp Thing sees this, he thinks, "Pulse too weak. No chance for me to save him. And that look, that reflection in his eyes, the image of a 7-pointed star." But just as Swamp Thing thinks that, the man begins to convulse, and the narration says, "At that, the barbarian shudders once, then lies still, and the Swamp Thing fairly boils with a sudden rage." Then Swamp Thing turns and notices that the gem is glowing next to him, and he thinks, "The gem! Somehow it is responsible for this, plunging me through time, and perhaps my poor friend as well. Why, you accursed hell jewel? I must know why." And almost as if in reply, the gem begins to glow even more, and the narration says, "And in answer, the hell jewel flares, its blinding brilliance laced with a rude cold whine that could be the sound of anger, or of dark unholy laughter. The Swamp Thing fades swiftly from sight." So Swamp Thing disappears, and then the man who was dead on the ground, he comes back to life, and then he grabs the pink crystal stone and runs away, and over this panel the narration says, "A blood-stained barbarian rises unsteadily to his feet, sighs softly in resignation, then picks up the glittering gemstone and staggers off into the mists." Then we turn the page and we get an interesting section that's called First Interlude. And we see Matt Cable, Abby Arcane, and Jefferson Bolt, and they're at a funeral in a graveyard. And the narration says, "It is uncommonly cold for a morning in June. Bleak clouds hang over the shrouded cemetery. Bitter wind cuts straight to the bone. If it wasn't so tragic, it would almost seem trite. But for Matt Cable, Abigail Arcane, and the seething young black man named Bolt, it's almost too tragic to bear. Then without looking at Matt Cable, Bolt says, "Why Ruthie Cable? Of all of God's poor forsaken children, why my girl Ruth?" And Matt replies, "You don't really expect an answer to that, do you, Bolt?" And then Matt puts his arm around Bolt's shoulder and Bolt says, "No. What I really want is something to stop making me tear out my guts. Something to occupy me, to distract me." And Matt replies, "Then, mister, I think I've got just the thing you're looking for." Then we cut back to Swamp Thing, who has appeared in a very weird-looking place. It looks like a stone dungeon of some type. There are torches on the walls, and there are lions that are in wooden cages next to him. And over this panel, the narration says, "A burst of brilliance, a cruel chill wind smothered almost instantly by darkling shadows, herald the Swamp Thing's arrival, but do little to alleviate his confusion." So as Swamp Thing appears in this new place and kind of looks around for a second, he thinks, Where am I now? A corridor of some sort, it seems. But where? When? So to figure out where he is, he begins to walk down some of the halls, but immediately as he turns a corner, he's spotted by a guard, and right when he sees Swamp Thing, the guard yells out, "Quere! One of the gorillas broken free somehow out of its cage! Help! Quickly! Someone help me!" So it seems this guard has mistaken Swamp Thing for a gorilla, and as Swamp Thing sees the man yelling, he thinks, "His language, a colloquial form of Latin." So I'm assuming Swamp Thing can't understand Latin, and I'm not exactly sure how he knows it's colloquial. But either way, that's the least of his worries, because as he turns, he sees some men that look like they're dressed like gladiators, and this is the hint that he needed to know where he is, because he thinks, "The clothing of these men, gladiators. Well, that tells me where I am. In ancient Rome, sometime about 100 AD. But it seems that these gladiators weren't just walking by, they were the help that the guard called. And there's three of them, one with a sword, one with a net and trident, and one with a big glove that has spikes on it. So the gladiator with the trident throws the net onto Swamp Thing, trying to trap him, and Swamp Thing thinks, "But that information won't do me a great deal of good if I let these hard-headed heavyweights chop me to pieces." So as Swamp Thing dodges the net, he actually gets stabbed in the chest by the spear, and the man with the sword does swipe and hit Swamp Thing's abdomen. But as we know from past issues, that's not really going to hurt Swamp Thing, just some mossy bits and green liquid comes out of his body. So as he's breaking free and trying to dodge these weapons, he thinks, "Don't really want to hurt them, but I have to get them out of my way before I can do anything about getting back to my own time." And luckily these men are kind of bad at fighting because they've all lined up in a row, and as Swamp Thing pushes on the man with the spiky glove, he falls backward into the others and they topple like dominoes. And as he pushes the gloved man back, Swamp Thing thinks, "Exit. Where's the blasted exit? Can't keep tossing Spartacus and company around like this all day." But just as Swamp Thing thinks this, the guard who originally called those gladiators over jumps on top of the lion cages and he pulls open the door, yelling to the gladiators, "Flee, warriors! This is no fight for such as you. A beast should be dealt with by other beasts, thus." And as the cage door opens, the lions run out straight at Swamp Thing, and Swamp Thing looks over his shoulder as the man yelled at and thinks, "No, that madman has released the lions." So we see the gladiators run away, and the lions begin to circle Swamp Thing like they're trying to figure out how to attack him. And over this panel, the narration says, "Cautiously, fangs bared, the great cats pad toward the moss-encrusted giant, sniffing the air, trying to determine whether this strange new beast who stands before them is foe or food." And it seems that the lions choose food because two of them leap on Swamp Thing and begin to bite down on his back, and Swamp Thing is able to grab one of them before it can bite, and as he wrestles with them, the narration says, "They come at him savagely, snarling, spitting, pounds upon pounds of primitive fury, determined to satisfy appetites that have for so many days been denied. Braced for the inevitable, the Swamp Thing meets the attack head-on, ignoring the slashing talons that tear great gouts of fetid slime and decaying moss from his misshapen back, ignoring the shattering pain until it can be ignored no longer." And like the narration said, Swamp Thing can't take this fight anymore as a third lion jumps on him, So he tosses the lion that he had a grip on away from him, and then he rushes for a gate that seems to be the way out. And as he runs with these lions still on his back, he thinks, "It's no good. They have the advantage in these close quarters. Got to get out of here. Give myself some elbow room. Don't know where this barred gate leads to, but right now, I'm in no position to be particular." And with that, Swamp Thing smashes through the barred gate, which I guess is made of wooden bars, not metal, and the lions get pushed off his back as he comes through. But unfortunately for Swamp Thing, this gate actually leads into the center of the Colosseum, where two gladiators are fighting to the death. And as Swamp Thing realizes this, the narration over this panel says, "Hurtling headlong through the wood-barred gateway and out into the mid-morning light, the man-brute skids abruptly to a stop, then blinks in sudden amazement at his new battlefield he's found. And as Swamp Thing takes all this in, he thinks, Lord, I'm in the Colosseum, smack in the middle of the gladiatorial games." And the two gladiators in the center of the ring are actually blindfolded, but the smashing of the gate actually distracts one of them, and as he turns towards the noise, the gladiator that he's fighting stabs him in the chest. And as that gladiator falls to the ground, Swamp Thing rushes to the man's aid, and as he catches the man from falling and lays him down on the ground, Swamp Thing thinks, "It's my fault. My fault he was stabbed. If I hadn't distracted him, he'd still be..." But Swamp Thing's thoughts are interrupted as the dying gladiator pulls off his blindfold, revealing his eyes, and Swamp Thing looks at them and they look very familiar. They are in fact the same eyes as the caveman from the prehistoric times. So the man has the pink seven-sided star irises that match the seven-sided star in the pink crystal that started all of this. And as Swamp Thing sees the man's eyes, he thinks, "Huh? Those reflections in his eyes. The image of a seven-pointed star. But it can't be." And then the man looks up at Swamp Thing and says, as he's dying, "You, but how? I disposed of the accursed gem, gave it away." And as Swamp Thing holds the dead man in his hands, he thinks, "He's dead. Again. And I'm once more responsible for..." But Swamp Thing's cut off as he notices the lions coming through the hole in the gate that he made, and he thinks, "Here come those blasted lions again." And as Swamp Thing turns to face them, we cut to the Caesar sitting high above in the Colosseum watching this battle of lion and Swamp Thing. And we see in the Caesar's lap, he has the pink crystal with the seven-sided star in the center of it, and he's kind of rubbing it. And over this panel, the narration says, "In the Colosseum's vast marble galleries, a sudden ripple of anticipation cuts the smothering air. The games thus far have been excruciatingly dull, and perhaps this strange new beast will provide a note of excitement. But to the Caesar's everlasting dismay, the excitement comes from a source much nearer at hand, for the star-carved gem he had stroked so casually a moment before flares into sudden life. So like the narration said, the stone begins to glow very brightly, and Swamp Thing even sees it illuminate from the Colosseum's battleground. But just like before, as this thing gets brighter, Swamp Thing begins to disappear. And as Swamp Thing sees the gem illuminate, he thinks, "The Hell Jewel! Caesar had the Hell Jewel!" But then he's gone, leaving the victorious gladiator to fight off the lions. But then, just like last time, we see the gladiator that had the seven-pointed star in his eyes come back to life, and he's able to sneak out of the Colosseum battlegrounds. And over this panel, the narration says, "A certain torn and bloodied form rises once more amidst the chaos of the moment, and stumbles almost reluctantly off into the shadows." Then we cut to a panel of Cable, Abby, and Bolt riding in Cable's car after the funeral, and there's a caption that says, "Second interlude." And the narration over them driving says, "The mood in the speeding car is almost blacker than the morning sky, as two somber men speak in almost angry tones." Then Bolt turns to Matt Cable, who's driving, and he says, "Well, Cable, I'm still waiting. You've got a deal for me. Spill it." And Cable replies, "Okay, Bolt, I'll give it to you as simply as I can. If you're willing, if I can trust you to follow orders, I want you to help me track down the Swamp Thing." Then we turn the page and we cut to a German village, and it doesn't look like modern day. The houses are very old school looking, but they're definitely made of wood. And then we see Swamp Thing appear in the streets, and over this panel, the narration says, "Again, the burst of brilliance, the dark, unnerving whine, And this time, when the Swamp Thing arrives, it is on a darkened city street. And as Swamp Thing takes in his new surroundings, he thinks, now where? A city, it seems. But what century? And what is that terrible stench in the air? Like the smell of burning refuse. Or the smell of death. And just as he thinks that, a man comes around the corner who is pulling a cart full of dead bodies, and he has a bunch of other villagers with him. And the old man who's holding a torch sees Swamp Thing and he yells, Gott im Himmel! So obviously he's yelling in German, and without any hesitation as he continues to yell in German, he stabs Swamp Thing in the chest with the torch, and we do hear him say amongst his German the words, the Black Death. So this must be in Germany in the mid-1300s, which is when the bubonic plague was tearing its way through Europe. And it seems like the man is actually calling Swamp Thing the Black Death. And of course, the torch doesn't really do anything to Swamp Thing's body. It lights him on fire for a second. And because Swamp Thing has heard the words Black Death, and he hears them speaking German, he thinks to himself, the language, the clothing, and that wagon filled with corpses. I'm in Europe in the mid-14th century, during the time of the Black Death. And after one good look at my muck-covered body, they've decided that I am the plague personified. And as Swamp Thing's chest begins to smolder, more of the villagers rush forward next to the old man with their pickaxes and shovels, and they're yelling at Swamp Thing, and luckily Len Wein has translated for us what they're saying. They're not saying it in German anymore. And the head man that stabs Swamp Thing with the torch says, Kill it! Slay the hellish thing! And a man behind him yells, But Hans, how can death die? And Hans replies, I do not know, Otto, but we can do no less than try. But just as he thinks that, Swamp Thing grabs the shovel out of Otto's hands, and he breaks it in half, and he thinks, I suppose I can't really blame these men for this, but I am becoming annoyed at all this nonetheless. So Swamp Thing picks Otto up by his shirt, and Otto yells out, Nicht, please don't! And as Swamp Thing holds him up, he thinks, sorry, but wherever I've appeared so far, in the course of this lunatic time trip, I've been instantly elected target for the day. And frankly, friend, I'm sick of it. And with that, he throws Otto's body into the group of villagers, and he takes off running down an alley while he's putting his flames out on his chest. And as he does this, he thinks, should take them a while to pull themselves together, which leaves me ample time to beat a strategic retreat and beat out these annoying tar flames while I'm at it. So once Swamp Thing gets the flames out, he's still walking through the alleyways of this town, and it seems like he's trying to find a place to hide as he thinks, no need to pinpoint my location for them. They'll find me soon enough as it is, unless I can somehow lose them in this maze of streets. So as Swamp Thing walks through the alleys, the narration says, down darkened streets, through twisting alleyways, the massive man-monster shambles, in hopes of evading his fear-fraught pursuers. And after some time, Swamp Thing figures he's walked enough and he's lost the villagers, and he thinks to himself, that should do it. They'll never find me now. So as he continues to walk through the alleyways, he sees a window lit up in one of these houses, and he hears a woman's voice coming from it saying, Lord, what a wondrous fool I have been to let you use me so. So hearing this, Swamp Thing peeks through the window, and he sees a man and a woman inside of a room, and they look pretty regal, like maybe they're some sort of nobility. And in the man's hands, we see he's holding the pink crystal gem and staring at the seven-sided star intently. And the woman continues yelling at him, saying, You wooed me so well, Milo Morbius, made me love you more than life itself, more than any infinity number of future lives. But you wanted not my love, Mobius, only the use of my witch's powers, and the gift those powers could bring, the once only conjuration of... But she's cut off as the man looks at her with an evil grin and bright pink seven-sided stars flashing in his eyes, and he finishes her sentence saying, Immortality. Yes, Gretel, I know, for at last, it is mine. And then he pulls the stone away from her because she was getting kind of close, and she says to him, But how could you have betrayed me so, Milo? In my heart, I believed you truly loved me. And Milo answers spitefully, And so I do, dear Gretel, but I love living even more. And then he begins to soften a bit as he continues saying, If only the accursed Black Death did not cover the land. If only I could have been assured my full span of years. If only there had been another way, Gretel, my love. I swear, I would not have stolen the immortality that was rightfully yours. But she is not accepting of his pleading, and she fires back, Spare me your hollow apologies, Milo, for they make little difference. You have chosen your path, and you will soon regret it. For the day will come, Milo, where you will tire of your eternal life and actively seek to end it, but you will seek only in vain. And then with vitriol in her voice, she explains, for only the hand of a friend can ever put you to your final rest. And Milo, my love, you have no friends. Still, you will try to die, and each failure will bring you back to time's beginning, to relive that failure, and the ones that will surely follow. And that, my darling, is the cruelest form of hell. And with that, she grabs the gem from the table that Milo has set it down on, and she throws it at him with all her might and says, Here, Milo, take the star-crossed gem that sealed our bargain. Let it forever be a reminder of how cheaply you bartered your soul. And as he catches it, he yells out, All right, Gretel, enough! Your razored tongue has drawn sufficient blood. I did not wish to hurt you, but it seems that was unavoidable and then as he looks at the gem, he sees Swamp Thing's face reflected in it, and he screams out, Lieber Gott! That face! Like the visage of a thing from the pit! So Swamp Thing has somehow snuck into this room, and he's entered through a pair of curtain doors so that they wouldn't notice him. And as the woman looks up and sees Swamp Thing, she asks, Who are you? And Swamp Thing thinks, I was right. It's him again. The man with the starlit eyes. And for a change, he isn't dying. But just as he thinks that, all of a sudden, the front door bursts open, and the villagers that were still trying to find Swamp Thing burst through the door, and Otto points at Swamp Thing and says, There it is! I told you we would find the accursed thing if we followed its slime-caked trail. And Swamp Thing whirls around at the door opening, and he thinks, No, not them again. And then he just punches Otto right in the face, and he thinks, Of all the miserable timing, I've got to rid of them, then try to communicate with my starry-eyed friend. Find out what the hell Jewel means to him, and to my time-traveling escapades. But as Otto falls to the ground, his torch falls also, and it lights the curtains in the room on fire. And then the other villagers begin to attack Swamp Thing with their farming weapons, and Otto gets up and he points at Swamp Thing and he yells, Onward, my friends! Let the cleansing breath of fire rid us of the black disease forever! But as the flames begin to rage throughout her house, the woman yells out, No! You've put the torch to my home! And then Swamp Thing notices the flames and he thinks, What? As he pushes all the attacking villagers away from him. And then Milo steps in between Swamp Thing and the villagers and he says, Fools, get out! Do you all want to die? Get out! Get out! But we see in the background that the woman is being trapped by the flames as they're about to engulf her, and Swamp Thing thinks, What's wrong with him? He's become so incensed with that mob, he's completely forgotten the girl. Got to get her out of here before the place becomes an inferno. So Swamp Thing rushes over to the woman, and he grabs her, and then he rushes the side wall of her house and bursts through it, and he thinks, And with those maniacs blocking the door, I guess I'll have to make my own exit. So him and the woman make it out, and as he drops her off in the alley, he watches the villagers that were attacking him run out the front door, and he thinks, Made it. And just in time. That whole place will be coming down in pieces any second now. Here come my old playmates. But where's my time-hopping friend? But just as he thinks that, all of a sudden the flaming house begins to collapse, and the narration says, And unfortunately, the Swamp Thing's answer is accompanied by a familiar burst of light and equally familiar whine. And we can see inside the bright pink light of the crystal illuminating, and then we see the silhouette of Milo inside, and then Swamp Thing begins to disappear again. And as this happens, Swamp Thing thinks, No, he's still inside and I'm fading away again. Not a chance for me to save him. But I have the feeling we'll meet again. Sometime. Then we turn the page and we cut to Matt Cable, Abby, and Bolt parking at a motel. And once again, we get some more text that says, Third interlude. And Bolt is answering Cable from before when Cable asked if Bolt would like to help him find Swamp Thing. And Bolt answers, You want me to do what? Man, you know how I feel about that swamp freak. If not for him, my Ruthie might still be alive. And as Matt Cable exits the car, he says, Come on, Bolt. You know that's a crock of crud. Ruth was shot to death by that maniac Zachary Nail, and Swamp Thing had nothing to do with it. In fact, if it wasn't for the Swamp Thing, we might all be dead, blown to Kingdom Come along with Nail's underground city. And Bolt doesn't like this, but he says, okay, so maybe you're right, but Nail's dead, and I've got to take my Matt out on somebody. And then Matt responds with something that is pretty dated now. And as we've seen, Matt Cable has changed his bigoted ways against Swamp Thing because originally he just hated Swamp Thing because he was different. And after Matt's realization that he was being prejudiced against Swamp Thing, he now thinks he has the upper hand on Bolt, and I guess tries to teach Bolt a lesson about bigotry, which, of course, Bolt doesn't need a lesson on that because he's a black man in America in the early 70s. But Matt Cable thinks he's pretty clever as he says, so you want to take it out on him. Why, Bolt? Because he's different? You know, friend, I think you're a bigot. But in the next panel, we cut away from that awkward scene to Swamp Thing, who appears in the swamp. And finally, he feels like he knows where he's at for once. And as he takes in his surroundings, he thinks, home, at last. Home. Who'd have ever thought that one day I would call this dismal bog home? And then he walks over to the water's edge and he thinks, better sit down. Try to puzzle what happened to me before. But his thoughts are cut off as he hears a noise and he thinks, huh? That sound. Like the clatter of a horse's hooves. And it's coming this way. And then out from some bushes, a soldier on horseback appears. And as Swamp Thing looks at the man's uniform, he thinks, oh no, that uniform. It's the right swamp I'm in, but the wrong time. I'm back in the Civil War. And the uniform that the man is wearing is blue, so I'm assuming he's fighting for the North. And upon seeing Swamp Thing, the horse becomes startled and it bucks the rider off, and we see out of the man's bag falls the pink gemstone. And Swamp Thing sees the gem and he thinks, and naturally, I've run into my starry-eyed friend once more. And as the man hits the ground, he looks up at Swamp Thing and says, you, again. Yes, of course. I remember that now. Yet there's something else I can't recall. Something important. And then he rushes to his feet and he grabs the pink gemstone and he says, damn, no time to think now. Got to get moving before they catch up. And it's not really in the panels, and this is kind of confusing, but I guess there are some Confederate soldiers around that were chasing this Union soldier. So as the man hears them nearby, he says, Reb Raiders, they've spotted the accursed jewel I carry. They're after me, and they'll stop at nothing to get. But just as he says that, the noise around them gets way louder, and it seems like there's more than just a couple Confederate soldiers out there. And Swamp Thing thinks, yes, friend, I hear it too. The sound of horses, many horses, coming this way. Not a hope of escaping them. And then the man says to Swamp Thing, I remember now. It's all so inevitable. And as he says that, all the Confederate soldiers burst from the woods, with the headman yelling, come on, you lazy hound dogs, there he is. And as Swamp Thing sees the soldiers, he thinks, unfortunately, my friend is right. Looks like it's time to play target again. So as the Confederate soldiers take aim at the Northern soldier, they realize Swamp Thing is there as well, and one of them says, but what's the thing with him? And as Swamp Thing walks in front of the Northern soldier to stop the bullets, another man fires and yells, makes no never mind what it is once it's dead. And then one of the other Confederate soldiers charges Swamp Thing, and the Northern soldier yells out, no, I won't let you kill him. He's important to me, somehow. But Swamp Thing just reaches up and grabs the charging Confederate soldier and pulls him off of the horse, and he thinks, I knew it. Our constant meetings through time were too much to be a coincidence. And then the Confederate soldier that's being grabbed by Swamp Thing yells, hey, you dad-blamed ugly, let go of me. And Swamp Thing thinks, not a chance, fella. Not until I'm certain my starry-eyed friend will be safe. But as Swamp Thing thinks this, the Confederate soldier that he's holding up in front of him pulls out his revolver and he points it at Swamp Thing's chest and he says, okay, mister, I warned you. Now I'm gonna blow you all to hell. And as the man fires into Swamp Thing's chest, and the narration says, a trembling finger tightens upon a trigger, and a well-oiled pistol splits sudden death. But it's a death that passes harmlessly through the chest of its intended victim, lodging instead on the spine of one who has often known death before. And what has happened is, the bullet has gone straight through Swamp Thing, has gone into the chest of the Northern soldier, and lodged in his spine. And as Swamp Thing turns to see his friend fall to the ground, he throws the Confederate soldier that he's holding aside, and he thinks, no, not again, not again. But the Confederate soldier sees the anguish in Swamp Thing's face, and he weakly says, no, Don't blame yourself. This was fated to happen, as it has so many times before. And then Swamp Thing rushes over to him and looks the man in the eyes, and the man continues saying, But never fear, monster, for we will meet again, somewhere, sometime. After all we've been through together, how could we possibly avoid it? And as the man dies in Swamp Thing's arms once again, his eyes begin to light up, with the pink seven-sided star shining brightly. And then the pink gemstone next to the man begins to glow brightly, and the narration says, And with that, the star-carved gem glows wildly once more, its maddening whine a siren song that steals the Swamp Thing swiftly away. So as the glowing gets brighter, Swamp Thing once again disappears, and Swamp Thing thinks, Oh no, here we go again. Then we turn the page and we cut to the final interlude, it says, and we see a very offended Bolt from what Cable had said previously in the last interlude. If you remember, he accused Bolt of being a bigot, so now Bolt is right in front of Matt Cable and it looks like he's about to punch him. But before he can get too heated, Abby runs up and says, That's enough! You two are supposed to be grown men, so why not act like it? But Bolt snaps back, Lady, nobody calls me a bigot and gets away with it. And Matt Cable doesn't help the situation because he yells, But it's true, Bolt. Admit it. You don't hate the Swamp Thing because of Ruth, but because he's something you can't understand. I know, because I used to feel that way myself. And amazingly, Bolt does not punch Cable in the face after this. He actually seems to calm down, and as he lowers his fist, he says, But if you don't feel that way now, why do you still hunt him? And Matt Cable answers, You know, sometimes I wonder. Maybe I'll know for sure when I catch him, which is something I may never do unless you help. And Bolt, who must be a saint because he's very understanding of what Matt Cable is saying, replies, You mean that, don't you? You do need my help. Well, it's against my better judgment, but you've got it. Then we cut to Swamp Thing, and he's once again in the swamp, but this time we see an airplane flying overhead, and it's a modern-day 70s commercial airliner. And as Swamp Thing looks up at it, he thinks, I'm still in the swamp, but unless I'm imagining that jet, I'm back in the present. And then all of a sudden, Swamp Thing hears a voice call out from behind him, Welcome back, my friend. I knew that accursed gem would draw you here sooner or later. And the man that comes out from the bushes looks like a 70s version of that Union soldier and the gladiator. So he's got a jacket with a pop collar, and he's got a mop head of hair. And as he walks towards Swamp Thing, he continues saying, It links us somehow, you know, bonds us together with shackles of time. And since I cannot tell you why, I can only apologize for the hell you have surely suffered at its whim. I can only apologize and ask that you grant me one last favor. And as Swamp Thing stares questioningly, the man says, I don't know what terrible sin you committed to be imprisoned in so hideous a form, but my sin, my curse, is far greater. I am an immortal, my friend, and I hate it. I hate the eternities I've endured, my failures forever flung back into my face. I want it ended, my friend. I want release. Please, I beg you. I implore you. Kill me. Put me to rest. And then he grabs Swamp Thing's hands pleadingly, but horrified by this request, Swamp Thing jerks away and thinks, What? And then he says out loud to the man, I cannot kill. And then he turns around and begins to walk away from the man, and the man begins to run after him saying, No, please come back, my friend. Come back. And Swamp Thing just continues walking away and thinks, I can't, Mobius. Forgive me, but I can't. And as the man chases after Swamp Thing, he takes a wrong step, and he accidentally walks into quicksand, and he begins to sink down. And as he does, he pleads to Swamp Thing, saying, I beg you, don't leave me like this. Please, help me. Don't let me die like this. Please, not like this. And as Swamp Thing turns and sees the man sinking, he thinks, The fool. He's fallen into the middle of the quicksand bog I instinctively avoided. Got to get him out of there before he goes under. So Swamp Thing rushes over to the edge of the quicksand, and he holds his hand out trying to grab the man, and the man's head is almost under as he reaches out for Swamp Thing's hand, and he says, If I die before you can kill me, the cycle begins anew. I'll be thrown back to time's beginning, forced to relive all my failures, including this one. Please, you can't let that happen. And as Swamp Thing reaches, it's just too far, and he thinks to himself, No good. He's in too deep for me to reach him. So Swamp Thing doesn't run to get a branch or anything. He just stares at the guy as the man's head goes under the quicksand. And as the man's head disappears, Swamp Thing thinks, he's gone under, dropped from sight like a stone. But he can't be too far below the surface. If I can pull him up before his breath runs out, he might still have a chance. So Swamp Thing jumps into the quicksand himself and begins searching around in the depths. But the next panel we get is Swamp Thing pulling himself out alone, and a very defeated Swamp Thing thinks, don't understand it. He couldn't have sunk that deep, and yet there was no trace of him, as if he'd simply disappeared. And then Swamp Thing follows Mobius's trail back to where he came out of the woods, and he finds the pink gemstone, and he thinks, Mobius may be gone, but he left a certain bauble behind him, and I'd best put it away for safekeeping, then leave something to mark the place, because I have an unnerving feeling he'll be back someday to pick it up. So Swamp Thing buries the gemstone under a bunch of moss, and then he takes a stone that looks fairly regular. There's nothing that really stands out about it, and he sticks it in the ground next to the gem for a marker. So I'm sure the man will definitely be able to find this after the thousands of years he will take to get here. And then Swamp Thing, like always, walks away sad into the sunset. And that is where we leave this issue. And man, this is a crazy issue. A lot of it, I'm not sure if I followed exactly how this gem works, especially at the end where it appears the man just disappeared instead of dying under the quicksand, because normally that would send Swamp Thing into another time spiral, but this time it didn't, and the stone didn't light up and travel as well. But what are you going to do? It's the 70s, and they only have 20 pages for these stories. So with that being said, if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains.and comicbooks, all one word, at gmail.com. And remember, until next time, stay swampy.